Hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and I am streaming live from the Team Needham Abode podcast studio. And I am super excited to have Dr. Marianne Pinkston on our podcast today. She is going to be talking about multifunction cardiogram, MCG. And if you follow me on social media, you know that I did have mine done a few weeks back, and I was super excited about the results and just super excited to do it and find out more about being proactive in my health. So that's what this is all about. She teaches people how to live better lives, and that's what she's going to talk about on our podcast. So Dr. Pinkston, welcome to our show.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it, Shawn. Good to see you this morning up in Washington, right?
That's right.
Washington. Love it. Thank you.
So I did a quick introduction of you, but tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to be on this podcast.
Gotcha. Well, I am a family practice physician, traditionally trained, and have been doing this for almost 30 years now, but about probably 17, almost 20 years ago. And, anybody who practices integrative medicine, which I do, has a story. I'll try to make it short. But about 20 years ago, I developed rheumatoid arthritis and became very, very ill. I had to take a lot of steroid medications, gained up to 300 pounds, developed diabetes and cancer and, all sorts of crazy things with my health. Also renal failure. I was almost on dialysis. Really, really insanity. And at some point, was kind of disregarded by the contemporary medical world. And it broke my heart because I love medicine. I love the power of medicine, what it does for people. But I started to figure out very quickly that there is a distinction between, the integrative world and the contemporary world. And so I began to study and learn, went through the fellowship at A4M, the American Academy of Regenerative Medicine and Anti-Aging. And then slowly began to lose weight. I lost 180 pounds, got my life back, got rid of diabetes, so to speak. I guess you never really get rid of it, but it put it into remission, the cancer too, all of that. And then began to take a turn towards looking at people and trying to educate people on living a better life. So that's how I coined my network, the Better Life Network, and then began a podcast. I'm on San Antonio radio. And then that podcast's out nationally and internationally, actually. And so my life now is speaking and education, what we're discussing this morning, which I'll just kind of slowly touch on. I'll let you lead. But the multifunctional cardiogram is something that I've only understood for about the last 2 years, but it's taken over my life because of the power behind it in diagnosing heart disease. 600,000 people die every year of cardiovascular disease. And, we have statins, we have stress tests, we have Heart Saver CT, we have all these wonderful things. And guess what? 600,000 people die every year of heart disease, right?
It's not working, right?
It's not working.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's kind of, I hope, the all-encompassing quick version. And, but yeah, I love what I do, exclamation point.
Well, that's quite a story. And I will tell you, it's not, your story is really extreme, although the story of healthcare professionals being unhealthy is just not very uncommon at all. It's amazing to me. And Jan, I talk about it often, how many, pharmacists, nurses, and doctors are so unhealthy themselves. And yet they're trying to tell their patients to take some of the things that you're talking about, the statins and do this and do that for you to prevent your cardiovascular disease. Yet, these healthcare professionals are walking heart attacks. And I think it's so important as healthcare professionals that we are good role models for our patients.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And I think part of my discovery of myself and walking the story that I have, or living the story that I have, was I was sitting in front of patients. I had a med spa kind of weight loss clinic. Here I am, 300 pounds, and for a reason, but 300 pounds, and telling people how to live their best life and lose weight. And I just, at some point, the bell went off. I said, I'm just not living congruent with what I'm telling people. I can't do that. And even with my children. But to add to your point of healthcare professionals not living very healthy, healthcare professionals also do not move their education forward. I think we learn what we learn, we get out, we open our business, we start having our families, we start getting busy, and we forget to keep learning. And then we also forget to quit, to keep listening to people and open up our minds to newer, better ways of doing things. We kind of get logged into the old way, the old school way of doing things, and that's very dangerous. So that's important to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Sometimes those old ways of doing things are called standards of care.
Yeah.
We won't even talk about that, right?
Algorithms, absolutely.
That's a topic for a whole nother podcast.
You better believe it.
So your diabetes is in remission. What about your rheumatoid arthritis?
Not at all. So this is the one thing that I think is just going to be my badge of honor for my life. 17 years and lots of great physicians. I mean, I've been under the care of Richie Shoemaker, Jim Laval, and all, sorts of wonderful doctors, and a great doctor here in San Antonio, Dr. Pendleton Wickersham, and we just cannot figure it out. But you know what? That's okay. That's what keeps me in tune with my patients and keeps my empathy going and my learning going. So it's controlled reasonably, I would say. But yeah, one of these days, hopefully I'll figure out the answer to that one. It's tough.
Good. And like you say, you're continually learning about yourself too, to try to find out answers that you can eventually help other people with someday.
Absolutely. That's the key right there.
So tell us how you got into this multifunction cardiogram. Tell us the history of it first. How long has it been around? You've been doing it for 2 years, but how long has it been around? How did it come about? All that.
The technology, it has been around 20 years, and it started with AI technology from Dr. Joseph Shen, who has invented this machine and this software. And, I hope at some point Dr. Shen wins the Nobel Peace Prize. This is how much I believe in this machine. And so it's been 20 years. And, the AI technology, before AI was really popular, before it was really catching hold like it is now. And so the technology and the software is learning every patient that it sees. It's learning on itself to improve its specificity and sensitivity. And the database of patients that have been tested, I think, is over 3 million people. The database is larger than Google as far as how many people have been tested and how much it's seen, and therefore how much it's learning on itself. Now, what it is like a 10-minute EKG. If you want to put a picture in your mind, a patient lays on the table with the leads connected, and it takes about 10 minutes. Now, it's very different from an EKG in that, an EKG takes about 15 seconds. You push a button and it reads your, electricity going through your heart over time. Well, this is very different. This reads several time strips and puts all the information together of frequencies. Then that read what is going on in the heart, the tissues of the heart, and all the cells and the blood flow and the electricity and the vascularity and all of that. And what it pulls together is a picture that a dog, once you become very proficient at it, can read in just a minute, literally, that can tell you over 26 potential diseases of the heart. So it can tell you 5 to 8 years ahead of time, maybe even 10 years ahead of time, in regard to cardiovascular arteriosclerosis. So the buildup of cholesterol in the arteries that lead to a heart attack. It can tell you about congestive heart failure. It can tell you about the progression of any heart valve issues that could be dangerous to you or benign. It can tell you about the hypertrophy, like ventricular hypertrophy. That's what causes heart failure. It can also tell you about other types of hypertrophy, cardiomyopathies, that can cause patients, like athletes who die suddenly on the field or the field of play at some point. It can tell you so many things, like I say, over 26 different diseases, but all ahead of time. And one of the things that really blows my mind about it is that cardiologists, when they look at their testing, so they put you through an EKG, then they step up to a heart saver CT, do echoes, the nuclear stress test, and then sometimes, if indicated, can move into a catheterization. But all of these tests that cardiologists do will tell you more about what's going on right now, if there's an event, impending right now, or if there's some damage or something that has happened in the past. It really does not have any predictive value of the future. So this test has predictive value. When the cardiologists, don't see anything, they say, oh, you're fine, but there can be a lot of pathology underneath. You can be impending a heart attack. A nuclear stress test may not find that. Therefore, this test will find this in years ahead of time, months to years ahead of time. Cardiologists, I feel also, and nothing against cardiologists, these are just two different ways of thinking. And so in my view, cardiologists look at, treating heart disease as something that we will put off your heart attack. They say prevent, but really there is no prevention built into this. What we do is you can put the testing into the hands of a family practitioner, you can put it in the hands of any practitioner. It doesn't have to be a cardiologist, any provider, and have this testing done. And the provider then has the tools to be able to see, do you have insulin resistance? Do you have some mitochondrial dysfunction, which we can open up on a little bit? It can tell you if you have underlying leaky gut, can tell you if you have some, anything that breaks into and adds to cardiovascular disease. It can tell you about these pieces so that I can treat that and therefore reverse cardiovascular disease or arterial sclerosis. Cardiologists do not believe that the arteriosclerosis or the buildup of plaque in the arteries can be reversed, and it can. Dr. Sam Fillingain has proven this now for 30 years, that this can be reversed. And so the test gives me the tools and the information to use to be able to reverse that disease and truly, truly prevent it. MTHFR is another thing that it picks up. We can also look at things like arrhythmias, for atrial fibrillation potential, and also look at the potential for ventricular fibrillation. Those are the things where, Uncle Jimmy went to sleep and he died peaceful in his sleep and never woke up. That is where we find, ventricular fibrillation, or the heart disease, the heart attack called the widowmaker. That is the big, the arteriosclerosis or the plaquing that occurs in the left side of the heart, that big artery in the left side of the heart called the LAD. And we call it the widowmaker because your first symptom of the heart attack is death. So these are all the things that it encompasses together to give you that predictive and treatment and prevention, true prevention.
Well, and as is typical of traditional medicine, we're really not very good at preventing problems,
right?
And we're really not very good at being proactive in preventing problems. And cardiologists are one of the most perfect examples of that. The only one that might be a little bit better of an example of how we treat things right now would be an ER doctor. Other than that, cardiologists are okay. You're having a heart attack or you have, these heart problems. Let's fix it now. Where in reality, it's something we should have prevented years ago.
Absolutely. It starts very early, and this testing should be done, I believe, on everybody starting at it's indicated all the way down to age 14, and only because that's where the study stopped. I believe we can do it younger than that for kids who want to go out on the soccer field and play and find, unusual diseases that could cause them to die in the, future on the field or whatnot. We should be doing this. Everybody, I believe, about age 30 should have this once a year to follow their, the development of their heart disease, which starts decades before the actual event would happen. Absolutely.
So tell us, I know there's lots of different disease states, but tell us in general, is there an in general principle about how to just prevent cardiovascular disease and to have good cardiovascular health? Is there some general principles that you would talk to everyone about, regardless of the little details that might be in the MCG?
Absolutely. So overall, I would say if I do, 10 MCGs, I would say 9 out of 10 of those results would show me metabolic disease. In this country, right? In this country, just almost everybody has a form of insulin resistance. Now, what I hear all the time when patients come to me and I taught them about, I see insulin resistance, they'll say, no, I went to my doctor and my labs were normal. Okay. Well, when I talk to them about what their labs look like, your labs are not normal. And this is very important. Patients, when you go to see your doctor and they tell you your results are normal, they are going based on reference ranges that is provided by the laboratory. Those reference ranges are not reference ranges of normals. They are reference ranges of a population average. The population is sick. So you are in the standard of, deviations there of a sick population. Therefore, you are normal compared to the population. That's not normal. And that's what patients don't understand. So when we check labs, there's a few labs that are very important that doctors should check and that patients should take a look at. And that is their glucose, their insulin, their triglycerides, their hemoglobin A1C. And those values I'm actually very, very strict on, but I'm strict on this based on 20 years ago, what was truly normal. So glucose should be less than 80 and insulin should be about 10 or 12 or less. The triglycerides should be less than 100 and a hemoglobin A1C should be less than 5. Most doctors will see a patient and say, oh, your glucose of 99, your insulin of 15, your triglycerides of 130, and, and those values and your A1C of 5.6 is all normal. And it's anything but normal. Insulin resistance is the most common disorder we have. Now, insulin resistance, people will say, well, I'm not diabetic. And I'll tell patients that, the difference between insulin resistance or pre-diabetes and diabetes, in my mind, is either you're pregnant or you're not. When you have insulin, right? When you have insulin resistance, you're just dying slower, but you're dying. And it's not good for you. And this is the reason why we're all overweight. This is the reason why we are all, dying of cancer, diabetes, and heart attacks and strokes, and all the fatty liver and kidney disease, and all of these things that we are dying from slowly and painfully over our lifetime, and silently for the most part. So that's kind of my my spiel that I give to my patients about insulin resistance.
I love it. That was good. And I think almost every chronic disease is related to metabolic dysfunction. Well, I mean, you could probably argue that every disease is. And I use that word very loosely because every is a powerful word. But our bodies were meant to take care of themselves and be disease free.
Correct.
So if your body has a disease, including cancer, that means you have some kind of metabolic dysfunction going on.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I would add, if you don't mind, is that the second thing that I see that is most common is something called MTHFR. And this is a genetic disorder that we have. 50% of the country has the inability to process folic acid. When you take in a vitamin of folic acid or you eat it in your food, your body doesn't use folic acid in that state to make its brain chemistry, to make its daily energy called ATP and all of these functions in your body. It actually needs to be converted into 5-methylfolate or tetrahydromethylfolate. And that is what the body uses. 50% of the country cannot do that. If you can't do that, you don't make your brain chemistry. You don't make your body energy. But that is one of the biggest reasons for cancer, dementia, and heart attacks and strokes. And it is extremely common. And I know of very few contemporary doctors, and I know of very few integrative doctors that actually focus on it. It's extremely dangerous and very simple to treat. It's amazing how simple it is.
Yeah. Methylcobalamin and L-methylfolate, right? I mean, that's pretty simple. And, in my opinion, Dr. Pinkston, I just think every patient should be, whether they've been tested for MTHFR or not, over 50% of people have MTHFR deficiency. It doesn't hurt to take methylcobalamin and L-methylfolate anyway. Probably just take it anyway.
Absolutely. I agree. And that is not hard to do. Patients can go to, I think it's Empower DX Lab or Empower Lab DX. I'm sorry. I guess I'm a little dyslexic. I get that confused, but .com. And that's something I'm sure I can provide to you and you can provide to them, but get a simple mouth swab and send it off for a genetic test and get the results themselves and know if they are MTHFR positive. And there's a couple of different ways to handle it if you are, but actually you are right. I think just making sure that you take the methyl Bs, the methylcobalamin and the methylated folate is the way to get around that, just without having to test. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. And do you know off the top of your head about how much the testing is?
Yeah, I think it's at last check, it was like $111. There might be a little tax included with that, but it's really very inexpensive. If you go get it done at the laboratory, it can be $150 to $250, and you can just do the simple little cheek swab with that.
And back on some of the lab testing we were talking about, you were talking about how important blood glucose, hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, and insulin is.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, you probably see this in your practice. When I talk to patients that have been to traditional doctors, hardly any of them have ever had their insulin checked.
Nobody checks it, it seems.
Right.
And if they even check the hemoglobin A1C, and even on the cholesterol, they check a very limited cholesterol panel, and then again the reference ranges are very misrepresented. Again, not to a population average. The information is just not available to patients with doctors not checking the correct things.
Well, and when you look at how that is driven, you can always follow the money. And insurance companies are the ones that dictate care now, unfortunately. And usually an insulin level is not covered by insurance. So the doctor doesn't order it. And I think there's some ignorance there too, because unfortunately doctors are usually educated, told what to do by insurance companies, and most doctors just believe them.
Right.
So that's why an insulin is not checked. And then they will say, well, people, an insulin level is expensive to get checked. And that's not true.
Not at all.
It is true. If you go through insurance, getting your insulin level is checked is expensive.
Sure.
But if you pay cash for it, it's like less than $30.
Absolutely. It's very inexpensive. You're right.
Yeah. And here's my opinion about checking insulin. I knew someone, we interviewed him on our podcast, who was morbidly obese, 700 pounds.
Oh.
He did not qualify for bariatric surgery for the state to pay it because he didn't have diabetes yet. Right? I mean, come on, he had diabetes, right? I mean, he did. He just did. There's just no way he didn't. But the definition of diabetes was based on glucose alone.
Right.
And for some reason, his pancreas was still producing a lot of insulin. And,
Sure.
It was still working.
Wow.
Can you imagine what his insulin level was?
I bet it was probably more than 200 or more.
It was in the hundreds. It was.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
It had to be.
Yeah.
So, there was a perfect example of, somebody that didn't have diabetes based on their glucose level, which, hemoglobin A1C is an average of that. So insulin is very, very important.
Absolutely.
I would say more important than glucose. And because, when we talk about most metabolic disease, we're talking about a lot of insulin resistance. That's what we're talking about.
And people may not really understand how it works. If I can briefly, explain, it's actually very simple. So when you eat a meal and the sugar is broken down, it goes from the stomach into the bloodstream, the blood sugar levels rise. The body senses that, tells the pancreas to put out insulin. So insulin goes out into the bloodstream. One insulin molecule combines with one sugar molecule. They go to the cell, which is what the sugar is going to feed the cell. And the insulin is like the key that unlocks the door to allow the sugar into the cell. And so that's how it functions normally. Diabetes type 2 or insulin resistance is where the cells change the locks. So the cell no longer recognizes the insulin. So the sugar stays in the bloodstream and continues to rise because it's continually being fed. So the body says, okay, the sugar is going up. Pancreas put out more insulin. So the pancreas will put out a ton of insulin like an army to go bust down the door. So what you can see is this time where the sugar makes it inside, but the insulin levels are really high. And that's how the body compensates before it becomes completely permanently diabetic. And that compensation you can watch. So your A1C may be normal or close to normal, close to normal, but you can see the compensation mechanisms behind it. You can see the glucose still a little bit elevated, but that insulin level is off the charts. And even when the A1C is close to normal like that. So that's how you can see that compensation before you actually get true diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you talked about in your story, for listeners and viewers, diabetes is reversible. So if you do catch it, there are ways to reverse it. And those ways are not necessarily medication. Remember, your body doesn't lack a medication. Your body needs the right inputs to, regulate your glucose appropriately.
I love
And
that.
some of those things are, for instance, you talked about blood sugar. Some of
Yes.
those things would be is just don't eat carbohydrates.
Mhm.
I mean, seriously, that's one of the biggest fixes. And the second one is we do need blood sugar to stay alive. We do
Absolutely.
need glucose to stay alive. We would die with a glucose of 0. That is a fact. Well, one of the ways that we can make sure that our glucose is regulated appropriately is burn it. So
Right.
move,
Right.
exercise.
Yes.
That will burn that glucose. Glucose is there for energy in our bodies.
Yes.
So if we're burning the energy, our glucose isn't necessarily going to be high all the time.
Right. And when I talk with patients about, carbohydrates is a very, very difficult thing to give up. And I tell patients, I really don't want you to truly give it up.
Yeah, right.
They're good, right? You get this. Absolutely. And you tell people all the time, sure, it's like there are good carbohydrates, there are bad carbohydrates, and then there's just too much of a good thing.
Exactly.
Too much or too little of anything is not good for you. And we need carbohydrates to get up and get going, get our brain moving, to exercise. And, carb loading can be a good thing to build muscle, or, there's lots of good things about it, but we do not do it appropriately. For instance, when I talk to patients about eating healthy, they say, I eat healthy. I juice and I make smoothies. And I'm like, okay, there's one example where you're not eating healthy, because when you eat an apple, a small apple, that's kind of God's perfect dose of an apple. You're not going to eat 3 apples.
No.
Which is what you put into your smoothie, right?
Right.
So when you take away that fiber and that pulp, you leave behind pure sugar. That fiber and that pulp, when absorbed together, actually it can be absorbed. It can lower your blood sugar instead of raise it. It's absorbed and utilized more appropriately. So, patients just need to go back to the basics and make it really simple. Just stop overdoing, over processing, and give the body, like you said, you're not devoid of a medication. You're devoid of the right type of nutrition and the feeding yourself correctly, and that's what people just need to focus on and do. You're absolutely correct.
And you brought up a great example, Dr. Pinkston, is when somebody says they're eating healthy and they talk about eating a smoothie every morning or at lunch or whatever. Yeah. Automatically I'm like, okay.
Oh, we got to talk.
Tell me what's in that smoothie. Oh, it's only good stuff. I put 2 scoops of whey protein in it, so I get a lot of protein. And then I put an apple in there and an orange in there and a banana in there. And then I could put some chia seeds in there. And then I put a scoop of yogurt along with half and half. And I'm like, you got 600 calories right here.
All of that? Exactly.
Right. I mean, when you crush all that stuff up in a blender and drink it, it's easy to do. You could not eat all that stuff.
Exactly.
Like you said, and this is what I challenge patients. I dare somebody to eat more than 1 apple. It's very difficult.
It is very difficult.
Even after I have an intense bike ride, it's hard for me to eat 2 large apples. I just, I can't do it.
Right.
But if it was in a smoothie or juice or whatever, easy.
Yeah. So absolutely. And with the diabetes and everything, once you develop that disease, you always have the underlying potential to bring it back. It's always fuming underneath. So even with me, I went from 300 pounds now down to 120 pounds, and I eat amazing and I exercise. This has been 6 or 7 years that I've kept this off now. And I still deal with insulin resistance. The metabolic dysfunction underneath always smolders and is there. It has to be maintained. And that is going to be a lifelong process.
Yeah.
It's not like I lost weight and now I can do anything I want to. Absolutely
No.
not. I'm going to battle that the rest of my life. And so,
Yep. And I tell that same story. My story is not as extreme as yours, but I lost about, let's see, 14, 15 years ago, I lost about 60 pounds, and I was on track to be where you were at,
absolutely,
and have all the disease states we're talking about.
absolutely.
And I lost the weight, and I tell people, that it's a lifelong struggle.
Yes.
I guarantee you, Dr. Pinkston, if I wanted to gain 60 pounds the next 2 months,
You
I
can do it.
guarantee you I could.
Sure.
I know I could. I would just eat anything and everything. I would buy all the junk food, eat a box of Oreos. I could still do that. That's why I don't buy them.
Absolutely.
So it's a lifelong struggle, but I don't want to be there again. And so I'll tell patients that too. When you get to your goal weight, whatever that is,
Mhm.
don't think that you're done.
No, no.
It's going to be something that you deal with the rest of your life, but that's okay.
Right. Right. It is okay. And you feel so much better for
Oh
it.
yeah.
Mentally, emotionally, and physically, you feel so much better for it. But it is a process lifelong. I was discussing with a patient this morning about how she went from, I think, about 260 now to just went under 190. But we talked about, it's been a year, and we talked about how this is just now step 2. Now she's willing to go the next step. And I'm like, this 10 years later, I'm on step 10. But that's my life now. It's going to be 11, 12. But this is a process that will have to go forever, and I can never go back. I refuse to go back.
That's right. Good for you. So as we wind this podcast up, Dr. Pinkston, tell us what you have a passion for.
Oh, wow. You know what? I really think education mostly, and just making sure that people understand the truth behind what we are fed out there in what I hope this is what you were asking me. Correct me if not. But I think there's a billion trillion dollar industry out there of the latest fad and the latest new thing and the latest science, when really it's not that difficult. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to buy a lot of products. You don't have to get into the latest diet. You don't have to do any of those things. That it is really just very simple. Just look at what you are doing from a very practical view of moderation, and just apply yourself on a daily basis the rest of your life. It is something that this type of thing that I've accomplished is something that anybody can, whether it's 5 pounds or 300 pounds. It is something that can be done, but get the support you need, get the education you need, and just try to realize that you don't have to fall into the myths and the traps that the industry is setting for you out there. So I think, just educating and making sure patients know that it's a lot more easy than you think.
Well, and let's just go back in history. Humans have known how to survive and thrive for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, without craft, without
Right. It was pretty simple stuff, right? Sleeping, moving, and eating well.
yeah,
And eating, just real food. It's that simple.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
if anybody has any questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you? I'm streaming your website here.
Well, thank you. Yes. So drpbetterlife.com. That is kind of the all-encompassing place to find information on from social media to a blog that I need to update. It's been quite a while. I'll go back and do that. But the podcast that I have, I would love for people to go look at and follow and share my podcast. I've done this for 3 years. I'm on San Antonio radio, and then it podcasts out. But you can go look up all of my shows for the last 3 years. I've got a lot of great people from A4M that have been on. Shawn, we need to get you on. And this is something that I would love for people to go look at and hit my social media and find out more information about how you can better your life. It can be done.
Yeah, it'd be an honor to be on your podcast. I would love that. So yeah, please get a hold of me.
Yes.
So, well, thank you so much for helping us realize our goal today, which is and always has been to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So you've helped us realize that goal, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for allowing me to be on, and thank you for everybody listening.
And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. our regularly scheduled podcast over the next 10 days. We don't have a regularly scheduled podcast over the next 10 days because Janet and I are leaving for Australia tomorrow. And we are kind of trying to take a break a little bit. So we'll be recycling some episodes, but please check in with us, follow us on Facebook and YouTube and my Twitter and LinkedIn, because we will be probably checking in from across the ocean. So you don't want to miss out. I'm going to the Masters World Championships mountain bike race, and I'm super excited to be there right off the Great Barrier Reef. Somewhere in a forest, there's a forest mountain off the Great Barrier Reef. So I'm going to find out here in a few days. So tune in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Thank you for tuning in today.